While of course I'm not personally opposed to people playing or enjoying violent video games, I do think that it's interesting that the majority of games, if not all of them, feature violence to some degree. But rather than talking about the potential psychological implications of violent video games, today we're actually taking a much more simple approach to the discussion. Are video games violent because violent video games are more popular amongst consumers? Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Hard Light Network. The topic of violence in video games is one of the earliest subjects that I ever covered on my channel, but some developers seem to think that its inclusion in most modern games is a bit of an inevitability. While of course I'm not personally opposed to people playing or enjoying violent video games, I do think that it's interesting that the majority of games, if not all of them, feature violence to some degree. In today's article, we're going to be talking about how one developer believes this to be the case and how gamers are actually contributing to this pattern of game design. I think this is an incredibly interesting topic to unpack, especially as gamers, as this conversation has always sort of stigmatized the gaming industry, even from its very conception. I'm sure that most older gamers, at least, remember the old boomer talking point that video games cause violent behavior in children. Whether it was accusations of Mortal Kombat arcade cabinets inspiring bloodlust in their players, or the Satanic Panic-esque news stories of children reenacting violent scenes from their favorite video games, the connection between violence and video games has always been hotly debated. But rather than talking about the potential psychological implications of violent video games, today we're actually taking a much more simple approach to the discussion. Are video games violent because violent video games are more popular amongst consumers? Of course, before we get into today's article, guys, I want to ask you to hit that like button if you like this video, subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the content that I've got coming up for you guys in the future, and also take to the comments section down below with your thoughts on this issue. Also, if you want to support this channel further, there are super thanks and memberships options down below. Feel free to join this channel for access to exclusive content and perks that you can't get anywhere else. But without any further ado, let's get into today's article. And today's reading comes to us from VG247 and is entitled, "This is Why I Tell People to Vote with Their Dollars." Fallout co-creator Tim Cain on, quote, "Violence as the default in AAA RPGs." Quote, "It means games that sell the most will dictate future games. Generally, most of the best-selling games these days have some amount of violence in them. And if you ask Fallout co-creator Tim Cain, that's because we keep buying them. Look, I'm not going to have a big, annoying conversation with you about violence in video games on a Sunday. It's a bit old hat, and there's plenty of room for nuance. I just don't feel like making a judgment call on it right now. Another time, maybe. All the same, when someone like the co-creator of Fallout, Tim Cain, shares his thoughts on video game violence and why games with violence keep getting made, it's probably at least worth a bit of a listen. Cain shared a video right at the start of the year titled "Violence as the Default in AAA RPGs," where he spoke about the simple reason as to why, quote, "so many AAA RPGs expect and so often require the player to do combat. It's money." The TLDR of it is, companies make games, and, in general, products that people will buy. That's it, Cain explained. Thanks, PC Gamer. It means games that sell the most, and I'm not even talking about review the best, just sell the most, will dictate future games. This is obvious. If you have a company and it's trying to make money, and there's one game type that sells millions of copies and another that sells 100,000, which one are you going to do if they both take just as much time and money to develop? This is why I tell people to vote with their dollars. Cain also pushed back on the argument that those that abstain from buying such games wouldn't be just a, quote, drop in the bucket, because if enough people came together, those drops become a storm and companies will listen. A big part of this obviously comes down to marketing too, as game with lots of advertising will be more likely to sell better. But Cain also notes that something like an action RPG is easier to sell conceptually than a classic RPG, even if they both have violence, because action RPGs are more dynamic to look at. Quote, "It's hard to show the other things," Cain notes, continuing. "How do we show that this game has a really good story? How do we show that it has fantastic dialogue? How do you do that in a trailer that may be only 15 to 30 seconds long? There's probably not really any solution to any of this. Games that sell will likely continue to, but it's always interesting when notable industry veterans try to find some answers all the same. That's going to do it for the written article, guys, but as always, I've got much more to say on this particular issue. Of course, I completely agree with Tim Kane's sentiment that we have more buying power as gamers in the industry than most people would like to believe. But to tell you the truth, when it comes to the topic of violence in video games, I don't think that we should necessarily be voting with our dollars in terms of removing violence from the industry, but we should vote with our dollars in terms of increasing the quality of the violence in these games. And by that, I don't simply mean making the games more brutal or visceral. Not every game will benefit from becoming a God of War violence fest. And while crazy, over-the-top action games like God of War or Devil May Cry certainly have their time and place to be enjoyed, I think that the majority of games, especially RPGs, would be better served by thinking about violence in the way that the Metal Gear Solid series does. The series as a whole has always made you consider the consequences of your actions, even if they are direct action espionage games. However, one of my top 10 games of all time, and easily one of the best in the series, Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater, has a specific part of the game that really hones in on this issue. Late in the game, Snake encounters a boss called the Sorrow, the once psychically gifted former leader of the Cobra unit, now turned into a phantom. Rather than fighting the Sorrow directly, Snake has to wade through waist-deep water as the Sorrow summons the ghosts of every character that you've killed in the game up to that point. Snake essentially has to dodge all these ghosts as they try to latch onto him and drain him of his health. And this fight is made exponentially more difficult depending on how violent you are throughout the game's playthrough. However, the opposite is also true, because if you get to this point of the game without killing a single enemy soldier, the only ghosts the Sorrow can actually summon are the previous bosses that you fought up to this point, because the game essentially forces you into lethal encounters with all of them. Not only does it make your encounter with the Sorrow significantly easier, but it also helps to reinforce the underlying message of this particular conflict. Snake is a soldier on the battlefield behind enemy lines, essentially left to his own devices and betrayed by his former mentor. It is entirely expected that he will inflict casualties on the enemy, but this particular encounter outlines the psychological effects of violence in this setting. Not only does this scene reflect the personal level of violence carried out by the player, but it also causes you to stop and think about the consequences of your actions, even as a soldier. It's masterfully done and genuinely forces you to consider the weight of your actions rather than simply being just another run and gun shooter. Games, especially RPGs, don't simply have to be go here, kill this enemy, rinse, repeat. They can be exciting, action-packed, and dynamic while still conveying important, mature, and even sobering lessons like this one. Maybe violence will always be a core component of a game's development and advertising cycle, considering that at the end of the day, they are products meant to sell. However, that doesn't mean it has to simply be mindless, gratuitous bloodshed for its own sake. But that's going to do it for this video, guys. Thank you so much to everybody who has watched up to this point. If you liked the video, hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe before heading out so you don't miss out on any of the content that I've got coming up for you guys in the future. Also, if you can, hit that comment section down below with your thoughts on this particular topic. Honestly, as gamers, I think a way to heal the industry as a whole is to come to expect a higher standard from the games that we play. And that standard shouldn't simply be limited to a game's stability or its presentation, but it should extend to the quality of every other aspect of the games as well. But of course, we've got a lot more to talk about, so as always, thank you guys for watching. If you liked the video, leave a like, and until next time, love you guys, safe travels.